Welcome to our interview here on this beautiful day in May. Just a brief introduction. You are a neurobiologist and have been engaged in neurodevelopmental biology, particularly the topic of learning and how the brain learns and the genesis of psychosis, for 20 years at the University of Bielefeld. I hope I understood that correctly. So, how does the brain learn and how does psychosis arise through traumatization? As we discussed yesterday, you are uniquely experienced in this field in Germany.
To explain it systemically. Yes. Physiologically, systemically.
Yes, and the reason why I am so interested in your knowledge, and I have already learned so much from you yesterday, is because the topic is about digitalization and children. And since I primarily advise mothers and their children regarding this topic, it is particularly important to spread this knowledge that you have in order to encourage parents to reconsider, to rethink the use of smartphones by their children. Therefore, I would like to start by talking about this topic, the brain and children, and what does the smartphone do to children? And my first question would actually be, what does the child's brain need in order to develop well?
First and foremost, the child's brain needs emotional attention, completely and entirely. Secondly, lots of movement. A lot of movement, free movement, massages, physical activity, complete body movement, and spaces to go through the different stages of development as described by Piaget.
And it is particularly important because movement is always connected to cognitive or brain development.
That is the foundation, the basic requirement, so that gradually, motivationally driven movement can lead to the slow maturation of cognitive function and intelligence.
And how does the smartphone, for example, interfere with that?
Yes, the smartphone is like a corset that is put on little children. It is, I would say, like a prison in which the toddler is locked up. Outwardly, it appears to be so free that it can swipe and manipulate the device with its little hands and seems to master everything. But for brain maturation, it is completely counterproductive.
What would you say are the biggest dangers, short-term and long-term, for children?
So the biggest danger is that they develop a digital addiction. That is inevitable, and their intellect suffers as a result.
And consequently, the intellectual performance, which is actually the desire of parents. Parents naturally want their children to go to school or try to provide them with as much education as possible, but that is actually being undermined.
Parents don't realize, because it is always claimed externally that children need to be brought along in the modern society. And that society is technologically driven. That children need to be brought along was the great success story for centuries. It was slowly, since the Stone Age, we didn't know that yet, and then slowly began to understand. Science found out that children at the age of 6 or 7 are able to learn arithmetic, writing, and reading. Children were brought along into adult life, and that has also greatly influenced pedagogy, understanding it that way. And even in the 1960s, there was a Nobel Prize for it. The first post-war Nobel Prize in brain research for Hubel and Wiesel, who discovered that in the enriched environment model, with a stimulating environment during early childhood, more connections between nerve cells develop in the visual cortex. And then it was found that more connections are formed in the motor fields afterwards through similarities. And that has greatly influenced pedagogy, the enriched environment model. That meant, we need to provide many opportunities for children to grow up in a stimulating environment. Those opportunities were, for example, transparent screens in strollers. Well, and at that point it started to go wrong because the children, beyond the visual processing and manual processing, were disturbed in their psychocognitive development by excessive stimulation in the environment. But that was still a minor harm compared to what we do today. If we think that we also have to introduce them to the technological age as children and shape them accordingly, that's a shot in the dark. We're shooting them back into the ice age. They cannot develop their brains, and it's very difficult for outsiders to understand.
Exactly.
It took neuroscience half a century to analyze all of this step by step through plasticity research. Plasticity is synonymous with learning, like how learning occurs in nerve networks. They are plastic, meaning they adapt to activities, and that was very successful in terms of the pedagogy of the past century, based on Piaget's insights into brain maturation. But now, it's a shot in the dark. What you're doing now, sending the child back to the ice age, that's what I'm saying.
Please explain a bit how important a healthy development of the frontal cortex is, how it develops well in a child, and to what extent it's inhibited by smartphones or digitalization, early digitalization of children.
Yes, I have to say that the frontal cortex requires the longest development because it is the highest authority. Its main psychocognitive functions involve social behavior, willpower, deliberate decision-making, historical thinking. All of that takes a long time to build, until the age of 18 to 20, when it is fully matured. That was the greatest insight we had around the year 2000 in brain research. That was probably the right time to declare the decade of brain research when we realized that. And this frontal cortex is severely hindered by early childhood digitalization. When a child is lured into the trap of immobility, not moving enough, when it falls into the emotional trap where it cannot develop emotions, empirical knowledge, when it is pacified and immobilized by staring at a tablet or a screen, the reason is that it cannot develop because the limbic system is involved. Most people are not familiar with it, but they know the hippocampus, they have heard of it. The seahorse in the brain, the hippocampus. And it forms an already matured cortical layer from birth, the limbic cortex, I should say. That limbic cortex is responsible for short-term memory formation, emotional processing, alertness, general alertness, integration, and processing of sensory stimuli. And because it is already matured to such an extent, a young child can immediately experience what mommy is. Mommy gives me food and drink, mommy is everything to me, and she is pure love. But when the mother is busy with her smartphone and denies eye contact with the child, that development doesn't occur. It's the entry point for the child's exit, where the initiation of the frontal cortex cannot mature in the child. That's point one. But the frontal cortex remains in a state of delayed maturation for a long time because the hippocampus, as I would call it, the secretary of the entire system, has dominance over sensory processing and the connection to movement, to motor behavior. All of this is initially controlled through this hippocampal circuitry. All of the processing is unconscious. The young child has no control over it. And that is the time when the child is simply being conditioned. And it has to be that way because cognitively, it cannot understand it yet. The cognitive processes, the cortical areas in the brain, mature very slowly so that a lot of traditional knowledge from society can be incorporated. That's what makes societies so rich, passing on their knowledge to children like a relay race. But that can no longer happen. The relay race is not happening anymore. Parents cannot transmit it anymore. The child becomes independent in the brain through the circuitry, the limbic switch apparatus, the hippocampal switch apparatus. It becomes independent within the framework of conditioning. It's simply being conditioned, and the maturation of the higher cortical areas cannot occur. We could only say that around the turn of the millennium, when we were able to analyze it immunohistochemically through the quantification of transmitters, neurotransmitters in the brain, we found that chemical substances are involved. The cerebral cortex is crucial for the frontal cortex. It plays a crucial role in organizing the frontal cortex. Before that, we couldn't say it. And it turned out that dopamine plays a crucial role in both the maturation of this hippocampal circuitry, which has a relay station in the brainstem where dopamine is produced. The brainstem is the chemical factory for all amines, including serotonin and adrenaline, and dopamine is produced in the small pool of nuclei for the maturation of the frontal cortex. And when too much dopamine is consumed in what I call the turbator, the digital turbator, the hippocampal circuitry is literally revved up. Then there are not enough resources left for the maturation of dopamine into the frontal cortex, and it becomes undernourished. That's why the maturation of the frontal cortex in these digitized children is compromised.
And that's because these devices are designed in a way that makes us produce a lot of dopamine.
That's right.
Among other things, online games trigger it, but also social media, the likes we receive, or the amount of messages we receive in the chats. All of this triggers dopamine release.
It is consumed in the limbic loop for the turbator. And children are wired for speed, agility. Evolutionarily speaking, it was crucial for survival that children are quick, that they can get up on their feet and run along, that they are agile and can react quickly, but also be conditioned. They have to do things, and they have always imitated their parents, century after century. They allowed themselves to be conditioned. Wunderbar. And then slowly, associative fields mature in the cerebral cortex with the formation of memory and the frontal cortex. And that also takes a lot of time. It is the privilege that has made us Homo sapiens sapiens, that we are allowed to have a slow development period in which maturation can occur. During this maturation process, the environment is internalized. This is learning success. The environment is internalized, not like sitting in a classroom, but when outside on the playground, in the garden, in the forest. All of that, sitting at the table with parents and siblings, all of those are the real learning experiences that a child needs. And when they sit in a corner and surf on a tablet, it is a huge digital trap.
But conditioning itself is not necessarily a bad thing.
Conditioning has always been the prerequisite and was right. But in good pedagogy of the last century, the child was slowly guided and led by good parents who explained things to them, who slowly led them. It was done freely, voluntarily, as the brain could handle it, to absorb it mentally in the frontal cortex, to internalize it into the maturing neural networks of the frontal cortex, and through the frontal cortex into the maturing association fields of the cortex, cerebral cortex. And if that is blocked, it is a deprivation of the highest degree. And if parents think they should bring their child into the new society by giving them a mobile phone and smartphone, then they have not understood the fundamental fact that the opposite is happening, that they are blocking the child from growing into the modern society. Because, well, I experienced it. I was 50 when it became apparent at university that we could produce our texts and create PowerPoint presentations with computers. Then it goes click and you can do it.
Unsere Texte herstellen konnten und PowerPoints herstellen konnten, dann macht Schnick und dann kannst du das.
Even the
Auch die
students,
Studenten,
those who grew up
die
analog,
waren
they
super,
were
die
great at
analog
it.
erwachsen gewordenen
But this
Studenten
generation,
konnten das
which
tadellos.
enthusiastically
Aber
embraced
diese
it, did not
Generation, die
understand that they
begeistert
owed their
mitgegangen ist,
ability to
hat nicht
understand it quickly
verstanden,
to the
dass sie
fact that
das
they
der
grew up
Tatsache
analog.
verdankte, dass sie das so schnell verstanden haben, haben nicht verstanden, dass sie das dieser Tatsache verdanken,
Yes, and these
dass sie
adults have
analog
to do the
erwachsen
same to
geworden
their
sind.
children.
Ja? Und dass sie
They
das
have to
ihren
grow
Kindern
up
antun
analog.
müssen. Sie müssen
Then it goes
analog
click and they
erwachsen
can do
werden, dann
it.
macht es Schnick und sie können
And
es.
if they grow up
Und wenn sie
digital, they are a
digital
mess.
erwachsen werden, sind
I'm
sie,
sorry to say that.
Entschuldigung, wenn ich das
A
sage,
mess for
Schrott für die
society that we have
Gesellschaft,
to deal
den
with.
wir aufarbeiten
And I
müssen. Und
believe that
ich
if this is now
glaube, wenn es
promoted through
durch die
schools and
Schule
spreads
gefördert,
globally, we will find
sobald es
ourselves in a
ausbreitet, werden wir in
disastrous
eine
situation.
verhängnisvolle Situation geraten.
Because we also discussed this. For example, I noticed it in my work experience when we had apprentices who grew up very digitally from an early age. It was hard for them to think coherently. If I do A, I can do B, but I also try C, and that was hardly possible in some cases. With the apprentices, I always had to tell them, now do this, then that. So coming up with ideas on their own, being creative. I always had the impression that was very difficult for them. And that's probably what you just described again. The effects of the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, right?
Ja,
Yes,
genau das ist es.
exactly, that's it.
Schülern kann ich auch
The prefrontal
ausreizen und ich kann
cortex
das auch
cannot
nicht machen.
mature and it
Wenn sie das
cannot
abmachen,
catch up.
wenn das im Kind, in den
The
Entwicklung
train
nicht
has
klappt,
left the
indem ich das
station.
freiwillig annehme.
Each
Jedes
child is
Kind ist anders
pre-programmed differently, one is slower,
vorprogrammiert.
the other has a
Das eine
slightly
Kind ein
faster
bisschen langsamer und
development.
das andere ein bisschen
You
schneller
have to give
entwickelt.
the child a
Man muss
lot
da
of
viel
freedom,
Freiräume
like
dem
in
Kind
open
schaffen.
school
Offene
designs, so that the children can take what they need on their own,
Schulunterrichtsgestaltung machen, dass die Kinder
intuitively.
sich
There
alleine
are schools
das
that do
nehmen,
this, where
intuitiv
6-year-olds
nehmen,
sit in
was
a
sie
class
gerade
with
brauchen.
8-year-olds.
Nicht? Der Unterricht muss
The
geöffnet
experiments
werden, viel
already
stärker
exist
geöffnet werden.
and they are
Es gibt
working
ja Schulen, die das
excellently.
machen, wo 6-
And
und
older
8-Jährige
children
in einer
teach
Klasse
younger
sitzen.
ones, which
Die
is so
Versuche gibt es schon
beneficial
und
for
die
both
laufen
sides.
hervorragend. Und
All of
welche
this
Jüngeren
exists.
mitunterrichten, weil sie keine
So we
Geschwister
already
haben.
have positive experiences.
Das gibt es ja alle. Also
It
man
should
hat
be
ja die
open enough for
positiven
children to
Erfahrungen.
be able to take in what they
Das
can handle and
muss so
understand
offen laufen,
intuitively.
dass Kinder sich
Then they
das
become
selber
intelligent, but away from
reinholen
cell
können,
phones and
intuitiv
smartphones
reinholen
because,
können,
due to
was
the
sie gerade
acceleration,
brauchen
I
können,
can
dann
only
werden sie
repeat it.
intelligent.
They are conditioned
Aber
and the
weg von den
turbator and
Handys
addiction
und
is programmed.
Smartphones, weil durch die
The
Beschleunigung
dependency, that they get
kann es
stuck
immer
there and the
wiederholen. Sie
prefrontal
werden
cortex remains
Smartphones
underdeveloped.
konditioniert sind
They are
und wie Sucht
overstimulated and conditioned like
vorprogrammiert
monkeys.
ist, die Abhängigkeit,
Excuse me for
dass sie da
saying
hängen
this, but
bleiben
they have
und
to go
da
through life
ständig
like
in einer
monkeys at a Stone Age
niederen
level.
Reifung hängen
A slightly
bleiben,
better version than
die
monkeys, but they have to go through life
konditioniert
trained,
sind
and it's
und wie die
pathetic.
Affen, Entschuldigung, wenn ich das sage, wie die Affen durchs Leben gehen müssen. Auf Steinzeitniveau, das ist noch ein bisschen besser als die Affen, aber trainiert
What we
durchs
don't
Leben gehen.
understand now, what adults don't understand, is that they owe their abilities only to the fact that they were allowed to grow up analogously. And probably the school and their approach to digitalization also play a role in this.
For example, there is an app called Anton that is funded by the EU. Here, writing exercises are supposed to be done with the mouse on the computer. And you have already mentioned how important it is to learn writing, cursive writing, reading properly, and all of that works through repetition. How is that also conditioning? That everything is repeated here so that children develop a sense of space and time.
Yes, I can explain that to you again. We live on a planet with three coordinates that are anchored within us, and they are not genetically determined. That means the hardware, the specifications, are genetically determined. The levels of switching in the cerebellum, where it is most evident, are arranged perpendicular to each other. The levels of switching come from the balance organ in the inner ear and from the muscle and tendon spindles. All of these bring the balance information first into the early developing cerebellum, where space is programmed in 3 dimensions: the horizontal, vertical, and sagittal planes. The three spatial coordinates must connect with many, many synaptic connections, countless ones. A single cell can form over 20,000 synaptic contacts. In the cerebellum, these are called Purkinje cells. One cell, and they must be well equipped with many spatially oriented contacts. That's why toddlers tumble, climb, and balance. And they do all of that on their own if you just let them. You don't even have to instruct them. They do it, the brain needs it, and the child senses it and does it all on its own if you don't lure them into the digital trap. And it has to be like that. I can't see it on a tablet, watch how others do it, and think my eyes are doing it, so I can do it too. That's brain dead nonsense. I have to experience it with my whole body through muscles and tendon spindles and the processing in the inner ear's sense of balance. And then it gets synaptically anchored. And through these small activities, which are the driving force behind it all, it is carried into higher realms to activate intelligent performance. That's why even an adult still realizes it. The adult has the best associations in higher cortical areas when going for a walk through rhythmic walking, using all the senses, engaging, bringing the sense of balance into a harmonious rhythm. That's when the association fields are optimally opened and creative thoughts come to me. Even adults still feel that it is the best for them. And it is absolutely essential for maturation. The child can only learn to write if they experience the written words with their whole body. They have to draw the letter O, write the letter I, say it once, and then they can do it. But learning to write through typing on a keyboard is a crime. Because a whole body experience and maturation is needed so the writing cortex and the language cortex in the brain get the information they need. And if they can't mature holistically while learning to write, then the brain regions are left behind.
That's a bit like reading, which I found fascinating because I'm currently reading a book, The Reading Brain, and it's beautifully described there as well. That it's not determined by our genes that we can read because speaking and seeing are genetically encoded, but reading is something we really have to work on. But what the brain actually accomplishes in the connections that are created to make it possible is just genius.
Yes, exactly. But they claim, I'm always asked about it, can't I read just as well on a tablet? That's nonsense, it's not true. On a tablet, I see everything in 2 dimensions, and even for reading, the brain needs the 3 dimensionality, the horizontal, vertical, and sagittal planes. I still remember exactly where certain things I wanted to remember are located. The shapes in chemistry. I want to know how the chemistry formulas on the tablet, the organic chemical formulas for carbon, hydrogen, how those who want to learn them, if they don't learn them spatially, I want to know how it works for chemistry students today. It cannot work. I still remember where certain things were in the organic chemistry book and how the formulas looked. Which side chains they were provided with, you don't forget that. You need spatial awareness when reading. You can read a cheesy romance novel or nonsense on a tablet, perhaps.
So during a lecture, instead of typing down notes, write them down. That's something I still remember when I went to university. I made a note on the page up there on the right, and later I remembered what was written there. I just needed that keyword then to retrace the process of understanding.
Yes, and look at the secretary.
schreibt ja mit einem
She
rasanten
types at a
Tempo,
rapid
ne?
pace on typewriters,
Schreibmaschinen.
and
Und das kann
children are
das
able
Kind
to learn
schon
that early
lernen.
on.
Ja? Weil dieser
Yes,
Automat, der
because that
funktioniert
process works
mit
automatically from the
quasi im
first
ersten
year of
Lebensjahr.
life.
Ne? Das ist das
That's the
Interessante.
interesting part.
Und ich glaube, dass
And I
der
believe that the
Nobelpreis
Nobel
dafür
Prize was awarded
auch
with a
mit dem
warning about it
Hinweis
6 or 7
vergeben
years
worden ist,
ago.
vor 6, 7 Jahren.
Pay attention.
Passt auf,
The
das ist eine
digitalization of
Riesengefahr
children is a
für die
huge danger.
Digitalisierung von Kindern. Die
They
bleiben
get
darin
stuck in the
hängen,
typewriter
in der
automatism because, as I said,
Schreibmaschinenautomatik.
the
Bleiben die
neurotransmitters in
hängen,
the chemical
weil, wie
kitchen
gesagt,
are
die
used up and
Botenstoffe
not
aus der
sufficiently
Chemieküche dafür
provided for the
verbraucht werden
maturation
und
of the
zu wenig
prefrontal cortex
bereitgestellt werden
and the
für
cognitive
die
maturation
Gehirnreife
processes in the
und
prefrontal
kognitiven
cortex.
Reifungsgeschehnisse im Stillen.
That's the
Ne?
devastating
Das ist das
part, why they
Verheerende,
can't get out of it
weshalb die
anymore.
da nicht mehr rauskommen nachher.
But again, what does the smartphone
Ja,
do to adults?
Yes, even if I
analog
grew up
erwachsen
analog,
bin,
there are
gibt
still
es
people who
auch
fall
noch
into the
Leute, die
digital trap.
trotzdem in die digitale Falle
I couldn't
geraten.
fall
Also
into
ich
it.
könnte nicht reingeraten. Ich
I
besitze
don't
kein
own a
Handy.
mobile
Ich
phone,
habe
and I believe I have
einen
enough
so viel
associative ability
Assoziationsvergabe
to
bekommen, dass
imagine what
ich mir
my
schon
dear
vorstellen
friends
kann,
and relatives are
was
currently
meine
thinking.
lieben Freunde und Verwandten
And
und
it's
so
enough to talk on the
gerade
phone
denken.
once a
Und es
week or
reicht, wenn man
so.
sich einmal die Woche oder was am
Communication
Telefon
through the
spricht.
telephone works wonderfully.
Kommunikation durch
I
Telefon
don't need a mobile
funktioniert ja
phone, and
wunderbar.
I rely
Ich
on my
brauche
own
kein Handy
understanding and
und
my
ich
sense of
verlasse mich
spatial
auf meinen eigenen
orientation, which
Verstand
could
und
be
meine
well developed.
Raumorientierung, die gut
Because I
ausgebildet
grew up
werden
in a
konnte,
village playing
dadurch, dass
cops
ich auf
and
dem Dorf
robbers.
mit Räuber und
Lots
Scharmütz
of ball
aufgewachsen
games and
bin und
riding
viel
scooters in
Ballspielen
childhood,
und
and drawing and
Rollerfahren
all
in der
those things,
Kindheit, ne?
and singing at
Und
home.
Malen und all diesen
Oh,
Dingen
how
und
much we
singen
used to
zu Hause.
sing.
Was haben wir gesungen
At home,
zu
just the
Hause?
family, and it
Alleine
brought
die
the family
Familie. Und das hat
together.
auch die Familie
These were all
zusammengeschweißt.
such
Ne?
wonderful
Das waren alles
prerequisites for
so
which I
wunderbare
cannot take much
Voraussetzungen, für die
credit.
ich ja nichts kann.
And they
Und
made
die
me
haben mich so
so
stark
strong
gemacht,
that
dass
I don't
ich
need a
dachte, nee,
mobile
ein Handy
phone all
brauche ich
the
nicht, ist ja
time.
furchtbar.
I'm
Und
not
lass
going
mich
to
doch
let
nicht da
myself be
anhängen, dass mich
attached to
jeder
it
da
so that
pausenlos
everyone can
erreichen kann.
reach me
Ich muss doch meine
constantly.
eigenen freien Gedanken
I should be
entwickeln
able to
können.
develop my
Alleine.
own
Und lass
free
mich darin
thoughts
nicht
on my
andauernd
own.
stören, ist ja furchtbar.
So, I
Und
have
da habe ich
completely
total
done
drauf
without it.
verzichtet.
There are
Beruflich gibt
professional
es die Situation,
situations
wo ich
where
die
I need
brauche.
them.
Gut, und solche
Well,
Leute,
and
die
there are people who are
gesund, sag ich
mentally
mal,
and
geistig,
emotionally
seelisch
healthy,
gesund,
they are better off.
obwohl wir Flüchtlinge waren
I
und
myself
Schlimmes
was a
erlebt haben,
refugee and
dennoch
experienced
geistig
terrible
gesund,
things.
auch damit,
But I
wie
was
die
able to
Familie
cope with it because
zusammengehalten hat,
my family was
erwachsen
stable
werden
and they
durfte,
allowed me to grow
die
up in a healthy
verkraften das.
way.
Die gehen damit um.
But there are
Aber
enough
es gibt
disturbances in
genug
childhood,
Störungen
children growing
in der
up in busy
Kindheit,
urban
alleine
areas,
Kinder im
children
städtischen
growing up
Bereich
without sufficient
aufgewachsen,
space to play,
Kinder ohne
children growing
genügend
up with frightened parents.
Spielraum aufgewachsen,
There are so many
Kinder mit
mothers and
verängstigten
fathers who are
Eltern
overly
aufgewachsen. Es
anxious
gibt
and
ja so viele Mütter
automatically
und Väter, die
transmit that to their
überängstlich sind
children.
und dieses
They
automatisch
automatically
übertragen auf
become
ihre Kinder.
frightened.
Automatisch
They have
werden
a
die
certain
verängstigt. Die
vulnerability
haben eine
even as
gewisse
adults and can
Vulnerabilität
fall
auch
into
als
the digital
Erwachsene
trap as
und können
adults.
in die digitale Falle auch als Erwachsene geraten. Ne, das ist schon
It's
sehr
already
traurig.
very sad that I
Das wäre
witnessed
schon
it
lange,
throughout
ich habe
my
das ja meine
childhood and
ganze
youth,
Kindheit,
how the
Jugend auch
friends of
über
anxious
gesehen,
mothers were
wie
treated.
Freundinnen von ängstlichen Müttern behandelt wurden. Ich dachte immer,
I always thought,
die arme
poor
Elke,
Elka,
dachte
poor
ich. Ja, die arme
Monica, my
Monika, meine
goodness,
Güte, was
what
hat
kind
sie
of
für eine
mother do
Mutter?
they
Meine
have?
Mutter war frei, hat mir
My mother
Vertrauen
was free.
geschenkt,
She gave me the
dass ich
trust to become
selbstständig werden
independent.
durfte, mein
My
Vater.
father too, and that
Und
makes you
das macht
strong.
stark. Die Eltern einem
Parents who
Vertrauen
give
geben.
trust.
Also wir haben schon viel
So, there are already
Schwächen
many weaknesses in
in den
children, in
Kindern,
adults, due
in
to
den
upbringing.
Erwachsenen drin durch Erziehungsmängel.
When is the brain fully developed? At what age?
Ja,
Yes,
man
they
sagt
say
mit
18,
18. Ich
but I
sage, ich habe
say,
ja nun
well, I have been teaching students
30,
for
40
30,
Jahre
40
Studenten
years
unterrichtet.
now.
Ich
I
behaupte,
would claim, I
mit
claim that with
26,
26 or
27 die
27,
einigermaßen
you are
erwachsen waren,
somewhat
die
mature.
promoviert hatten bei mir.
So if you could give any indication at all of when or from what age one could even consider giving or offering it to a child, would you say at least 18?
At
Früher
least
sind 18.
18, I
Ich
would
würde
claim
behaupten,
I would approach it that way
ich würde
today.
heute so rangehen.
Completely remove the
Völlig weg
mobile
aus der
phone,
Kindheit, das
smartphone,
Handy,
and
Smartphone
television
und
from
Fernsehen,
childhood.
völlig weg. Da
The
müssen die
parents
Eltern
have to
mitziehen.
go along
Sie
with
können
it.
nicht selber abhängig
They
sein und
cannot be dependent
ihren
themselves and
Kindern
impose it on their children.
oktroyieren, sie
If
sollten
they
das
shouldn't
alles
do all
nicht tun.
that, then
Dann
they
machen
do
sie
it
es heimlich.
secretly.
Das geht nicht. Sie müssen
That
mitziehen,
doesn't
müssen
work.
viel spazieren gehen,
They have to go along with
Sport
it,
treiben mit
do a
den
lot of
Kindern,
walking,
lesen
engage in
gemeinsam,
sports, read
unterhalten,
with the
singen, alle
children,
die
have
Dinge
conversations
müssen sie machen.
together,
Auf neuer
sing.
Ebene müssen wir
They
das
have to do
erfahren,
all those things.
was die
We have to
intelligent machenden
experience life on a new
Dinge
level
sind.
with
Wir
the
wissen
things that
das
make
jetzt,
us
wir können es
intelligent are.
modernisiert aufgreifen,
We know
endlich
it
in eine
now, we
neue
can adopt it in a
Pädagogik bringen,
modernized way,
gießen.
finally
Wir
bring it
wissen
into a
das,
new
die Dekade der
pedagogy.
Hirnforschung hat uns das
They
alles
don't
klar gemacht.
know.
Das
We
ist
know that the decade of brain
der,
research has made
das
all of that clear to us.
Entscheidende, dass wir
That is
die
the crucial
Korrelate
thing,
dafür
that
im
we need
Gehirn
the
brauchen,
correlates for it in the
um
brain to
unser
promote our
Bewusstsein, unsere
consciousness, our
Intelligenz zu
intelligence.
fördern. Wir
We
wissen das
know
alles
all of
und
that.
wenn Eltern und
And if
Pädagogen und
parents,
Politiker das
educators,
nicht wissen,
and politicians
ist es
don't
ein
know it,
Verbrechen.
it's a crime.
Gehören sie bestraft,
They
muss ich
should be
sagen. Sie können
punished,
es
I
wissen
have to
heute
say.
und man
They
muss
can
es
know it
völlig
today,
rausholen. Und
and it
ich
must
würde
be
sagen, für eine
completely brought out.
Übergangsphase
And I would
sollte man
say, during a
allen, die
transitional
einen
phase,
Schulabschluss
everyone
mit
who
der
finishes
Reife
school
oder
with a diploma, a middle school diploma,
Gesamtschulabschluss
or a high school
oder
diploma,
Abitur
even if they finish
von
earlier
der
at
Schule gehen,
16, should be
wenn sie
offered a
früher gehen, eben
chance
mit 16
to acquire
schon
digital
gehen,
skills in a
ein
half-year
Angebot
course and
machen,
take that
die
knowledge it with them.
Digitaltechnik in
And
einem
making
halben Jahr
computer science a
in einem
mandatory
Kurs
subject for
zu
students is
erwerben
pure
und
nonsense.
mitzunehmen in ihr
As if
Leben. Nicht
everyone
je
now
nach
has to become Elon
Ebene, auf
Musk
der sie
and
die Schulung
emigrate to
verlassen
Silicon Valley.
und nicht früher. Und
It's pure nonsense. What is happening now?
Schulfach Informatik obligat für die Schüler zu machen, ist reiner Unsinn. Als ob jetzt jeder Elon Musk werden müsste und nach Silicon Valley auswandern soll. Das ist
Fortunately,
doch reiner
half of
Schwachsinn,
society is
was jetzt
inclined towards
passiert. Die
humanities,
Hälfte der
given what's
Gesellschaft
happening
zum
today.
Glück ist geisteswissenschaftlich angelegt.
Artificial intelligence is, of course, a topic now. So what now? We know it has been developed since the 1960s. Now it is entering the consciousness of the majority due to ChatGPT. Is artificial intelligence really more intelligent than us humans?
Ja,
Yes,
da wird
there is
jetzt
speculation
spekuliert.
about that
Noch
now. The
sagen ja
chatbot
selbst
ChatGPT, for
KI-Forscher noch
example,
nicht,
is not
Chatbot
yet at that
GPT
level. It is at
ist
the
noch
level
nicht
of
so
something
weit,
like a
ist
middle
jetzt so
school
weit,
diploma.
dass so
But in a
mittlere
few years, it will have the intelligence
Reifenabschlussschülerniveau
of high
etwa
school
bietet, aber
graduates.
in ein paar Jahren wird
The more they have storage of big
Abiturientenintelligenz
data,
haben.
the better they
Je mehr die
become, and they can
einspeichern
present everything
über
much
Big Data,
faster.
umso besser werden die und viel schneller können sie alles darlegen. Das ist
That is
keine
not real
wirkliche
intelligence,
Intelligenz.
it is the
Das
automation of
ist
the entire cognitive
Automatisierung, nicht,
process.
des ganzen Geschehens.
Those are just given
Das sind nur
instructions that these machines
Vorgaben, die
have,
man ja
which are
hat, die
put
zusammen
together, and it
kombiniert
is a
werden. Und das ist eine
pseudo-intelligence.
Scheinintelligenz
So it
nach
is
außen.
not
Es
a
ist keine
creative intelligence that
kreative
such a machine will
Intelligenz, die
ever
so eine
have.
Maschine je haben wird.
That's one thing I will
Das ist das
say.
eine, was ich sagen werde.
It
Es wird
will
nie
never
sein, die
be.
können noch so
No matter how much we make it
scheinintelligent machen,
intelligent, turning
Abiturienten
high
oder
school
Studierte
graduates
draus
or
machen,
educated
wenn dieser
individuals into
Übersetzer
it.
GPT da
I mean,
der
this
horizontal
translator,
in eine
it
andere
translates
Sprache, Englisch
horizontally into another
Spanisch, das schon
language, English
übersetzt,
or Spanish or
das,
whatever
da
language
bist
you
du ja
like.
baff, ne? Dass er
It's
so
very
intelligent ist, ja
impressive that
kein
it can be so
Dolmetscher, das so schnell
intelligent to
und so
interpret and
perfekt
reproduce it so
wiederzugeben.
quickly and
Das ist alles
perfectly.
Automatisierung, das
But
ist
it's
keine
all
kreative
automated.
Intelligenz.
That
Die
is not
kreative
creative
Intelligenz, die braucht
intelligence.
jeder einfachste Mensch, die
Creative
brauchst du auch als
intelligence is needed by
Handwerker.
every
Ne?
single
Das
person,
wissen die
even
gar
as a
nicht, wie sie
craftsman.
selbst als
Every person
einfache
has creative
Menschen, als
intelligence. Just
Handwerker
like
sind
craftsmen,
wunderbar.
they
Ich
are
habe als
wonderful.
Hausbesitzer so viel mit
I have
Handwerkern
so
zu
much
tun. Die
interaction
sind
with
mir viel lieber
craftsmen
als
as a
meine
homeowner. I
Kollegen,
prefer them to
muss
my
ich ja ehrlich
colleagues.
sagen.
I have to
Die,
honestly
mit denen
say.
kann ich mich viel besser
I can
unterhalten.
have
Die haben
much
viel
better
mehr
conversations with
Intelligenz
them.
als
They
meine
possess much
Kollegen.
more
Denn das
intelligence than my
Studieren bringt
colleagues.
dich eingleisig
Because studying
in eine
leads you down a one-track
Spezialisation
path,
hinein,
where you leave out
bei
many
der
general
du
aspects of
viele
life.
allgemeingültige
You lose your
Aspekte
common sense.
außen vor
And you are
lässt
so
und du bist
convinced
so
of your
überzeugt von
one-sided
deinem
knowledge, you
einseitigen
emphasize
Wissen,
it so
stellst es
much,
auch so
that
in
you
den
are no longer
Vordergrund,
useful,
dass du,
that you are a
dass du
specialist who
ganz
lost his common
unintelligent wirst,
sense. That is less helpful for society, and such individuals cannot navigate their own lives. They may be able to tie a knot or make a slit, perhaps only having enough intelligence to properly tie a tie. But beyond that, it is not enough, and every day we are faced with unexpected events, whether in dealing with other people or natural occurrences. And especially what is coming our way now, the climate change, simply requires a lot of intelligence.
Gerade was jetzt auf uns zukommt, erfordert mit dem Klimawandel erfordert einfach viel Intelligenz.
For example, these activists in Germany, who glue themselves to public roads, that lacks creative intelligence. Because if they were intelligent, they would protest in a completely different way. And if they were to ask me how I would protest intelligently, I would say in terms of preventing climate change, there are many ways. What they do, it's the same primitive level that politicians themselves display, and that is what is disturbing to me, that the younger generation is already so unintelligent, so affected by digital impairment, lacking the capacity for reflection and thinking about the future, lacking responsible thinking. That is shocking.
And that is the generation that has probably also grown up with cell phones, now focusing on. I believe it's good for parents to hear your warnings and thoughts, and parent who is watching this, I congratulate you. Apparently, these parents are considering the case. But these parents might have gone down the digital road because they didn't know any better. So, can we also say something positive to these parents? I don't want them to feel hopeless, because psychologically, it is often the case that one rejects too much doom and gloom. Do you have any uplifting words if parents say, I understand it now, and we want to change?
It is never too late. I mean, especially my generation, who grew up with a Christian background, remember the 12 virgins waiting with burning torches for Jesus, and the others who did not light their torches. Hope never dies. Even in the last minute, hope can exist, and unexpected, even positive events can help us make a turnaround. Nature dictates these paths to me.
Yes, that is responsible. The sensual experience of nature to strongly develop again, very, very strongly.
The holistic thinking, allowing it to affect me, the realization that I have to let it affect me, then I can develop incredible creative forces from it.
And what I used to say is that it may also mean that mothers and fathers might have to change their life structure.
Exactly.
That means, how much time do I have for my child?
Yes, put in all your love and use a lot of intellect and will for it. We have the capacity.
Yes, thank you. It was a wonderful and very rich conversation. What you have now shared with me and the viewers from your incredibly profound knowledge, it comes across. In summary, I can say, we as Homo sapiens, we as humans, are truly a treasure trove. And how wonderfully our system has been perfected over thousands of years. And that we can again come into this awe of ourselves and observe it in children as well.
Exactly.
Start to enlighten other parents. I always say that we should try to engage in conversation with other parents. It does make a difference. For example, if the children are friends and we parents have similar thoughts as well, then there is no danger that when my child visits his friend, it would be exposed to all the junk that I try to keep away from my child.
I mean, a crucial point is the acceleration that we are exposed to. Even us
Auch wir
adults, it hinders
Erwachsenen,
us through
die uns
driving
bringen
cars, through
dazu, durch
everything,
Autofahren,
through
durch alles,
watching
durch Fernseh
TV,
gucken,
through
durch diese
digital
Maschine,
technology.
die Beschleunigung
The
der Zeit,
acceleration of
die auch
time,
in
which
uns
is on the
nach Rhythmen
contrary ingrained in
verankert
us
ist, die
with
langsam
rhythms that
spielen.
resonate
Wir müssen
slowly.
in diese Langsamkeit
And we must find
zurückfinden.
our way
Durch
back to this
Spazieren gehen,
slowness
nicht
through
durch Joggen,
walking,
durch
not through
Spazieren
jogging,
gehen
through
mit den
walking with the
Kindern,
children.
wandern, nicht
Not
schnell
fast
Radfahren,
cycling,
sondern
but
wandern, zu
hiking,
Fuß gehen, die
walking.
Ameisen beobachten. Das so,
Observing
was Kinder
ants,
sehen
acquiring what
wollen, sich
children
das
want to
Staunen
see,
für die
the wonder of
Natur
nature,
erwerben,
acquiring
neu
it anew.
erwerben. Wir
We
haben
have
die
also
Natur auch neu
recognized nature
erkannt,
anew since we
seit
have
wir die
illuminated it
so
so much in the last
durchleuchtet haben im
century.
letzten Jahrhundert. Das letzte
The
Jahrhundert
last
hat in der
century has brought so many
Verhaltensforschung,
insights in
in der
behavioral
ganzen
research,
Biologie,
in
der
biology,
Entwicklungsbiologie, der
developmental
Hirnforschung, der
biology, brain
Verhaltensforschung,
research,
in all den
behavioral
Feldern so
research,
viele
in all those
Erkenntnisse
fields,
gebracht,
that we must
dass
confront
wir
this
dieser
cybernetics,
Kybernetik,
this
dieser
artificial
künstlichen
intelligence,
Intelligenz
and recognize how it
entgegentreten
blinds
müssen,
us, how it
nicht? Und
prevents us
erkennen
from
müssen, wie
progressing.
sie uns ein Brett vor den Kopf schiebt, dass wir nicht weiterkommen.
Too. And that's why I truly thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to speak with me and share such important insights now, because the time is now, and therefore I will end this conversation and thank you very much.
I thank you too.